The massive Nexus station floated in the darkness of space like a giant metal flower, with its arms reaching out in all directions and lights blinking across its surface like stars. Ships from dozens of different worlds docked at its ports, and Admiral Kang Hyun watched through the viewport as alien vessels that looked like nothing humans had ever built before moved past his small transport ship. Some were long and sleek like metal snakes. Others were round and covered in spikes, and a few looked like they were made of living crystal that glowed with inner light. Kang Hyun was a tall man with gray hair and steady eyes who had spent 30 years in Earth's space navy, and he had never seen anything like what waited for them at Nexus Station. Next to him stood Lieutenant Commander Park Ji-soo, a sharp woman in her 30s who carried herself like someone who could handle any problem that came her way. She was looking at the same alien ships, but her face showed no fear, only curiosity about what they would face today. "Sir, the HSS Defiance has docked successfully," Park Ji-soo reported as she checked her tablet. "Captain Lee Min-ho says the crew is ready for the presentation." Kang Hyun nodded slowly and straightened his blue uniform with its simple Earth insignia. Today was humanity's chance to show the galaxy that they belonged among the great powers of space, but he wondered if their enemies would take them seriously. The other species had technology that seemed like magic compared to what humans could build, and their ships were massive things that could probably destroy entire planets if they wanted to. They walked through the station's corridors, which were built to accommodate beings of all different sizes and shapes. The ceiling was high enough for creatures that stood 3 meters tall, and the floors had different textures for species that walked on tentacles or claws instead of feet. Alien beings passed them in the hallways, and some stopped to stare at the humans with eyes that were too big or too small, or colors that did not exist in nature on Earth. The main amphitheater was huge, with thousands of seats arranged in circles around a central platform where a massive holographic display showed images from space. Representatives from different worlds sat in their special sections and talked in languages that sounded like music, or grinding metal, or sounds that no human throat could make. Kang Hyun and Park Ji-soo found their seats in a section marked for newer council members and waited for the presentation to begin. General Vextar of the Hegemony Empire stood up first, and his forearms gestured toward the hologram as it showed his fleet. He was tall and thin with purple skin that seemed to shimmer in the light, and when he spoke his voice carried easily through the entire amphitheater. "Behold the Hegemon's Pride, our newest dreadnought that stretches 2 kilometers from bow to stern and carries enough firepower to crack open moons," he said with obvious pride. "Its plasma cannons can melt through any known armor, and its shields can withstand the explosion of a small star." The other alien representatives made sounds of approval and respect as the hologram showed the massive ship from different angles. It looked like a floating city made of weapons with gun ports covering every surface and energy fields that glowed like trapped lightning around its hull. Smaller ships flew around it like insects around a giant, and even those escorts were larger than anything humanity had ever built. War Chieftain Gorth of the Brutok clans stood next, and his presentation was even more impressive. He was a creature that looked like he was made of living rock with arms thick as tree trunks, and a voice that sounded like an avalanche. "The Bloodrender and her sister ships carry antimatter torpedoes that can destroy entire space stations with a single hit," he boomed. "Our armor is forged from metals taken from the cores of dead planets, and our warriors have conquered 1,000 worlds." Fleet Marshal Zeal of the Synthetic Collective did not stand because its mechanical body was built into its chair, like part of the furniture. When it spoke, its voice was perfectly calm and emotionless like a computer reading data. "Our vessels think faster than biological minds can comprehend and coordinate their attacks with mathematical precision that cannot be defeated," it stated. "Each ship learns from every battle and becomes stronger while our enemies grow weaker." One by one, the great powers of the galaxy showed off their military might, and each display was more impressive than the last. Ships that could move faster than light, weapons that could destroy stars, shields that could protect entire planets from attack. The alien representatives talked among themselves and pointed at the displays while making sounds that probably meant they were impressed or maybe planning their own military upgrades. Finally, it was humanity's turn, and Admiral Kang Hyun walked slowly to the center platform while the holographic display changed to show their contribution to galactic defense. The HSS Defiance appeared in the air above them, and compared to everything else they had seen, it looked like a child's toy. The ship was only 400 meters long with a simple design that looked more like something built in a factory than a weapon of war. Its hull was plain gray metal with just a few weapon ports visible, and a single large cannon mounted on the front that looked almost primitive compared to the energy weapons of other species. The silence in the amphitheater was broken by sounds that took Kang Hyun a moment to recognize as alien laughter. General Vextar made a high whistling noise that might have been how his species showed amusement, while War Chieftain Gorth's laughter sounded like rocks falling down a mountain. Even Fleet Marshal Zeal's mechanical voice took on what might have been humor when it said, "How quaint that the humans brought their cargo hauler to a military demonstration." "Perhaps they are confused about which meeting they were supposed to attend," said Ambassador Velkoth of the Hegemony Empire, and his words brought more laughter from the alien representatives. Maybe someone should explain to them the difference between a warship and a transport vessel. Park Jisu's jaw tightened, but she kept her face calm as the mockery continued around them. Other species joined in the laughter, and some even pointed at the human section as they made jokes in their own languages. The sounds filled the great hall and bounced off the walls until it seemed like the entire galaxy was laughing at humanity's pathetic attempt to join the ranks of real military powers. "Look at their little cannon," said a representative from the Crystal Hive Mind whose voice sounded like wind chimes. "Do they plan to throw rocks at their enemies like primitive cave dwellers?" Admiral Kang Hyun stood quietly in the center of it all and let the laughter wash over him without changing his expression. He had expected this reaction, and in a way he was glad to see it because it meant their enemies were making exactly the mistake humanity was counting on. Next to him, Park Jisu checked her communication device and nodded slightly to let him know that Captain Lee Minho and his crew were ready for whatever came next. The holographic display continued to show the Defiance from different angles, and each view brought more comments about how small and weak it looked compared to the mighty fleets of the established powers. Some aliens wondered aloud why humanity had been given a seat on the Galactic Defense Council at all, when they clearly had nothing useful to contribute to the common defense. "Their technology appears to be several centuries behind our current standards," observed a delegate from the Etherean Republic in a voice that tried to sound diplomatic, but still carried disapproval. "Perhaps they would be better served in a support role until they can develop more adequate capabilities." Admiral Kang Hyun finally spoke, and his voice was calm and confident despite the ridicule surrounding him. "The HSS Defiance represents humanity's commitment to defending this galaxy against any threat," he said. "We may be newcomers to this council, but we did not come here to hide behind the fleets of others." This brought even more laughter from the assembled aliens who seemed to find the idea of human military capability to be the funniest joke they had heard in years. Some of them were wiping tears from their eyes or making whatever gestures their species used to show extreme amusement. But Admiral Kang Hyun was not finished speaking, and he waited for the laughter to die down before continuing. "We would welcome the opportunity to demonstrate that appearances can be deceiving, and that the measure of a warship is not its size, but its effectiveness in battle." The laughter stopped suddenly as the aliens realized that the human was actually challenging them to put their ridicule to the test. War Chieftain Gorth's massive form shook with what passed for laughter among his people, and the sound filled the amphitheater like an earthquake. He had been drinking fermented battle nectar since the presentations began, and the strong alcohol made him more aggressive than usual, which was saying something for a Brutok warrior who lived for combat. His rock-like skin was darker now with the flush of intoxication, and his small red eyes glowed with the desire to prove his superiority over these weak little mammals. Did the small human just suggest that his toy boat could stand against a real warship? Gorth asked in his booming voice that made the metal walls vibrate. Perhaps the thin air of space stations has damaged his tiny brain. The other alien representatives laughed again, but there was a different quality to the sound now. Less pure amusement and more anticipation of what might happen next. They sensed that something interesting was about to occur, and their attention focused on the drama unfolding between the human admiral and the Brutok war chief. General Vextar leaned forward in his seat with his forearms folded across his chest and his purple face showing keen interest. "Surely the human does not seriously propose a combat demonstration," he said in his smooth voice. "That would be most unwise given the vast difference in capabilities between our vessels." Fleet Marshal Zeal's mechanical voice cut through the chatter with its emotionless precision. A live-fire exercise between the human vessel and any proper warship would result in the complete destruction of their ship within moments, it calculated. The outcome would be so predictable as to be pointless, but War Chieftain Gorth was drunk enough and proud enough to see opportunity in the human's words. He stood up to his full height of nearly 3 meters and pointed one massive finger at Iowa and Admiral Kang Hyun. "I accept your challenge, little human," he declared in a voice that carried to every corner of the huge room. "My flagship Bloodrender and 2 escort destroyers against your single tiny vessel in live combat." A shocked silence fell over the amphitheater as the aliens realized that what had started as mockery was turning into an actual military confrontation. Some species, like the peaceful Etherians, looked worried about the implications, while others, like the warlike hegemony representatives, seemed excited by the prospect of seeing human military power tested in real battle. Counselor Thys of the Etherian Republic rose gracefully from her seat, her flowing robes seeming to move like water around her tall, slender form. Her large eyes showed genuine concern as she spoke in a voice like distant music. "Perhaps we should reconsider this course of action," she suggested diplomatically. "The loss of any vessel and crew would be a tragedy that serves no useful purpose." "The human started this," War Chieftain Gorth rumbled with satisfaction. "Let him finish it or admit that his species has no business sitting among real warriors." Admiral Kang Hyun looked around the amphitheater at all the alien faces watching him and waiting for his response. Some showed curiosity, others showed pity for what they saw as his coming humiliation, and a few showed the cruel anticipation of predators about to watch prey being torn apart. He knew that this moment would determine humanity's place in galactic society for generations to come. "The stakes should be appropriate to the importance of the test," Kang Hyun said calmly. "If humanity loses this engagement, we will voluntarily withdraw our application for membership in the Galactic Defense Council and return to our home system." This announcement brought gasps and excited chatter from the assembled delegates because everyone understood what he was really saying. Humanity was betting their entire future in galactic civilization on the outcome of a single battle against overwhelming odds. It was either the bravest thing they had ever seen or the most foolish. "And when I win," War Chieftain Gorth added with obvious pleasure, "the humans will admit publicly that they are not ready to play with the real powers of this galaxy." Lieutenant Commander Park Jisoo stepped forward and whispered something in Admiral Kang Hyun's ear, but he shook his head slightly and turned back to face the Brutok war chief. "We accept your terms," he said in a voice that carried clearly through the sudden silence. "When shall we begin?" The arrangements were made quickly because once the challenge had been formally accepted, the ancient laws of the Galactic Council required that it be carried out without delay. The combat would take place in the Kepler Proving Grounds, a region of empty space that was used for military exercises and weapons testing. Automated monitoring systems would record everything that happened and ensure that both sides followed the rules of engagement. Word of the challenge spread through Nexus Station faster than light-speed communications could carry it, and soon representatives from dozens of species that had not been at the original presentation were arriving to witness what many expected to be humanity's complete humiliation. The betting pools that sprang up among the aliens gave odds of 1,000 to 1 against the human ship surviving more than a few minutes. Aboard the HSS Defiance, Captain Lee Minho called his senior officers to the bridge for final preparations. He was a compact man in his 40s with steady hands and eyes that missed nothing, the kind of officer who stayed calm under pressure and made decisions based on facts rather than emotions. His bridge was smaller and more cramped than those of the alien vessels, but every station was perfectly organized and his crew worked with an efficiency that would have impressed even their enemies if they had bothered to look. "Status report," Lee Minho ordered as he settled into his captain's chair. Chief Engineer Kim Daeho's voice came through the intercom from the engine room, where he had been making final adjustments to their most important systems. "The Cascade fusion array is running at optimal parameters, Captain," he reported. "All safety protocols are disabled and we're ready for full power discharge on your command." Weapons Officer Choi Yoonji looked up from her console where streams of data flowed across multiple screens. She was a small woman with quick fingers and quicker reflexes who could calculate firing solutions in her head faster than most computers. "Targeting systems are calibrated and locked," she said. "The main cannon is charged and ready." Navigator Yoon Sujin had been plotting their course through the proving grounds, and her calculations filled several displays with complex orbital mechanics. "I have our optimal firing position calculated, Captain," she announced. "Distance of exactly 50,000 kilometers will give us the best angle, while keeping us outside their effective range." Communications Officer Han Jiwon was monitoring the alien fleet communications, and her translation systems were picking up interesting information about their enemies' preparations. "The Brutok ships are taking aggressive formation, sir," Shigyu reported. "They're not bothering with any defensive measures because they don't consider us a real threat." Sensor specialist Oh Seung-min was watching the tactical displays that showed the positions of all ships in the area. "3 enemy vessels confirmed, Captain," he said. "1 heavy cruiser and 2 destroyer escorts exactly as agreed. Total firepower approximately 50 times our rated capacity." Captain Lee Minho nodded as he listened to each report, and then opened shipwide communications so that every member of his crew could hear his words. "Ladies and gentlemen, in a few hours we will either make history or become a footnote in someone else's story," he began. "The aliens out there think they know everything about human capabilities based on our appearance and their assumptions about our technology." The bridge crew listened intently as their captain continued speaking in his calm, confident voice. "They have made the same mistake that humanity's enemies have made throughout our history," he said. "They judge us by their own standards and find us wanting because we do not fit their expectations of what a proper military force should look like." Chief Engineer Kim Dae-ho's voice came through the speakers again with barely contained excitement. "Captain, the beauty of our design is that they literally cannot comprehend what we've built," he said. "Their sensors will read our fusion cascade as a simple reactor because they've never seen matter converted directly into directed energy at this scale. The alien species approach warfare like a mathematical equation," Captain Lee Minho continued. "Bigger ships, more weapons, stronger shields equals victory. But humans have always won our wars through innovation, adaptation, and the willingness to try things that others consider impossible or insane." Weapons Officer Choi Yoonji smiled grimly as she ran final diagnostics on her systems. "They're about to learn that human engineering doesn't follow alien rules," she said. "When they see a simple kinetic cannon, they assume it fires simple projectiles. But they have no concept of what happens when you channel the power of a controlled stellar fusion reaction through a focused beam array." The crew made their final preparations as the deadline for combat approached, and throughout the ship there was an atmosphere of calm professionalism mixed with eager anticipation. These men and women had trained for years with their revolutionary weapon system, and they knew that today would prove whether human ingenuity could overcome alien superiority. Navigator Yoon Sujin announced that they had reached their designated starting position and all systems showed green across the board. The Kepler Proving Ground stretched across millions of kilometers of empty space, marked only by the automated monitoring stations that floated like metal islands in the cosmic dark. These ancient devices had recorded thousands of military demonstrations over the centuries, and their sensors could detect and measure every form of energy and matter known to galactic science. Today they would witness something unprecedented. War Chieftain Gorth stood on the bridge of his flagship Bloodrender and felt the familiar excitement that came before battle. The massive warship around him hummed with barely contained power, as its crew of 200 Brutok warriors made final preparations for what they expected to be the shortest combat engagement in recent memory. Through the armored viewport, could see his 2 escort destroyers Skullcrusher and Bonebreaker taking flanking positions in perfect attack formation. "Target acquired," announced his weapons officer in the growling language of the Brutok people. "The human vessel is maintaining position at extreme range, probably hoping to delay their destruction for a few extra minutes." Gorth laughed, and the sound echoed through his bridge like rocks grinding together. His officers joined in the laughter, because they all understood how pathetic the human attempt at military positioning looked to experienced warriors. The tiny Earth ship hung in space 50,000 kilometers away like a lost cargo hauler that had wandered into a combat zone by mistake. Back on Nexus Station, the observation decks were packed with representatives from dozens of species who had come to witness humanity's expected defeat. Giant screens showed tactical displays of both fleets while smaller monitors provided close-up views of the individual ships. The difference in scale was so dramatic that some species wondered if the humans were playing an elaborate practical joke. General Vextar of the Hegemony Empire had brought wine from his homeworld to celebrate what he expected to be an entertaining few minutes of destruction. "Look how they position themselves at maximum range," he said to his companions while gesturing at the tactical display with one of his forearms. "The humans actually think distance will save them from superior firepower." Fleet Marshal Zeal calculated probabilities in its mechanical brain and shared its conclusions with nearby delegates. "The human vessel's positioning suggests a defensive mindset consistent with inferior technology attempting to maximize survival time," it announced in its emotionless voice. "Estimated combat duration: 37 seconds from first weapons. Discharge to complete destruction." Strategic analyst Quindar of the Aquatic Conclave floated in his water-filled observation tank and studied the tactical situation with the cold logic that made his species excellent military advisors. "The humans are following obsolete doctrine from their pre-spaceflight era," he observed through his translation device. "They position for long-range engagement because their primitive weapons require it, not understanding that modern shield technology makes such tactics useless." The betting pools had grown throughout the station as more species arrived to watch the spectacle. The odds against human survival had reached astronomical levels, and some aliens were wagering entire trade agreements on how quickly the Brutok warships would finish their work. A few optimistic souls had placed small bets on the humans lasting more than 1 minute, but even those were considered wildly unrealistic by serious gamblers. Counselor Thys of the Etherian Republic watched the preparations with growing sadness, because her peaceful species valued all life, and she could see no outcome that did not involve the deaths of the human crew. "Perhaps we should attempt one final diplomatic intervention," she suggested to her aide, but the younger Etherian shook his head with resignation. "The challenge has been formally accepted under ancient law," her aide replied in their musical language. "Any interference now would dishonor both sides and potentially trigger a larger conflict between their respective species." Aboard the HSS Defiance, the atmosphere was completely different from what the aliens expected. Captain Lee Minho walked calmly through his ship, checking on different departments and finding his crew focused and ready for what they knew would be the most important engagement in human history. Unlike their enemies who saw this as a simple execution, the human crew understood they were about to demonstrate capabilities that would reshape galactic politics. Chief Engineer Kim Daeho was in the bowels of the ship making final adjustments to the Cascade fusion array that formed the heart of their revolutionary weapon system. The device looked deceptively simple from the outside, just a series of metal cylinders connected by thick cables and surrounded by cooling systems that kept the incredible energies contained within safe limits. "Captain, the fusion cascade is stable and ready for discharge," Kim Daeho reported through his communicator. "The containment fields are holding at optimal strength, and we have enough fuel for one full power shot with reserves for emergency maneuvers if needed." The beauty of human engineering was that it often looked simple on the surface while hiding incredible complexity beneath. Where alien technology relied on exotic materials and complex energy patterns that required massive ships to contain them, humans had learned to achieve the same effects through clever design and precise timing. The Cascade fusion array could channel the power of a small star through a focusing system that compressed months of stellar output into a single devastating beam. Navigator Yoon Soo-jin had positioned the Defiance with mathematical precision at exactly the distance and angle that would give their weapon optimal effectiveness. Her calculations took into account not just the current positions of all ships, but also their predicted movements, the gravitational effects of nearby stellar bodies, and even the quantum uncertainties that affected energy transmission over interstellar distances. "We are at perfect firing position, Captain," she announced with quiet satisfaction. "Distance 50,000 kilometers, angle of attack optimal, all variables calculated for maximum impact efficiency." Weapons Officer Choi Yoonji sat at her station surrounded by displays that showed targeting information in formats that no alien weapons system could interpret. Human military technology had developed along different lines from the rest of the galaxy, focusing on precision and efficiency rather than raw power and intimidation. Her weapon could deliver more destructive force than anything in the Brutok arsenal, but it did so through focused application rather than brute strength. Targeting. Systems locked onto primary target, she reported while her fingers danced across controls that would have baffled alien engineers. Secondary targets marked for sequential engagement if required. Main cannon charged to full capacity and ready to fire on your command, Captain. Communications Officer Han Ji-won was monitoring transmissions from the Brutok fleet, and what she heard made her smile grimly. The enemy was so confident of easy victory that they were not even bothering with tactical communications or defensive preparations. Their casual attitude toward the engagement would work perfectly in humanity's favor. "Enemy ships are maintaining loose formation, sir," she reported. "They're treating this as a target practice exercise rather than actual combat. Their shields are at minimum power, and their weapons are charged but not fully focused." Sensor Specialist Oh Sungmin watched his instruments carefully as the automated monitoring stations recorded everything that happened in the proving grounds. Soon those same sensors would detect energy readings that would force the galactic scientific community to completely revise their understanding of what was possible in military technology. "All monitoring stations are active and recording, Captain," he announced. "When we fire, every species in the galaxy will have access to the sensor data through the Proving Grounds archive system. They will see exactly what human engineering can accomplish." Captain Lee Minho returned to his bridge as the final countdown began and settled into his command chair with the calm confidence of a man who knew exactly what was about to happen. Around him, his officers made their last preparations, while throughout the ship the crew of 200 humans waited for the moment that would announce their species as a major power in galactic civilization. The tactical display showed the three Brutok warships moving into attack formation with their massive hulls bristling with weapon ports and their shields glowing with contained energy. By any conventional measurement, they represented overwhelming superiority in firepower, armor, and battlefield experience. Their crews had fought in dozens of campaigns and conquered entire star systems through the application of superior force. But conventional measurements did not account for human ingenuity and the willingness to approach old problems with completely new solutions. The aliens had spent centuries perfecting variations on the same basic themes of bigger guns, stronger shields, and more powerful engines. Humans had instead asked whether there might be entirely different ways to achieve the same objectives. "All stations report ready, Captain," announced his executive officer. "The enemy fleet is beginning their attack approach and should enter their optimal firing range in approximately 3 minutes. Captain Lee Minho activated ship-wide communications, one final time before the engagement began. War Chieftain Gorth raised his massive fist above his head and brought it down on his command console with enough force to dent the metal surface. "All weapons fire," he roared in the ancient battle language of his people. "Show these weak mammals what real power looks like." The Bloodrender and its escort destroyers unleashed their full arsenal in a coordinated barrage that lit up the darkness of space with deadly light. Plasma bolts the size of small buildings raced across the void while antimatter torpedoes followed behind them like tiny suns that could crack open planetary surfaces. The combined firepower was enough to destroy an entire fleet of conventional warships, and the energy readings made the monitoring station's sensors scream warnings about dangerous radiation levels. On Nexus Station, the alien observers leaned forward in their seats as the devastating attack closed the distance to the tiny human vessel. The tactical displays showed streams of destruction converging on the Defiance from 3 different directions, and the mathematics were simple enough for any species to understand. No ship that small could possibly survive what was heading toward it. "Impressive coordination," admitted General Vextar as he watched the Brutok attack formation. "They are not taking any chances with the humans despite their obvious technological disadvantage." Fleet Marshal Zeal's mechanical brain calculated the energy output of the combined barrage and found it satisfyingly overwhelming. "Total destructive force equivalent to 17 stellar fusion bombs," it announced to nearby delegates. The human vessel will be vaporized so completely that no debris will remain for analysis. Strategic analyst Quindar floated in his tank and watched the attack with professional interest, while timing the weapon's flight to calculate exactly when the human ship would cease to exist. "Impact in 12 seconds, he announced through his translation device. "The engagement will conclude precisely as predicted." But aboard the HSS Defiance, Captain Lee Minho was watching his tactical display with calm satisfaction as the enemy weapons approached exactly as his crew had hoped they would. The Brutok ships had positioned themselves perfectly for what was about to happen, and their aggressive attack formation meant they could not easily maneuver to avoid return fire. "Enemy weapons incoming, Captain," announced Sensor Specialist O. Seungmin with no trace of concern in his voice. "Impact in 10 seconds if we maintain current position and heading." Captain Lee Minho turned to his weapons officer and spoke the words that would change galactic history forever. "Choi Yunji, you are weapons free," he said quietly. "Show them what human engineering can accomplish." Weapons officer Choi Yunji's hands moved across her controls with the precision of a surgeon and the confidence of someone who had practiced this moment thousands of times in simulation. Her targeting computer had been locked onto the enemy flagship since the beginning of the engagement, and every calculation was perfect down to the quantum level. "Cascade fusion array activating," she announced as power readings throughout the ship spiked beyond anything the monitoring stations had ever recorded. "Main cannon charged and ready for discharge." Deep in the engine room, Chief Engineer Kim Daeho watched his instruments with the focused intensity of a man controlling forces that could destroy his own ship if handled incorrectly. The Cascade fusion array was channeling the power output of a small star through focusing systems that compressed stellar energies into a beam narrow enough to fit through the ship's main cannon. "Containment field stable," he reported as temperatures. Inside, the weapon core reached levels that would have melted most known materials. Fusion cascade at optimal efficiency. Energy conversion at maximum rated capacity. The aliens watching from Nexus Station suddenly noticed something impossible happening on their sensor displays. The energy readings from the tiny human vessel were climbing beyond what their instruments could measure accurately, and several monitoring stations began broadcasting emergency warnings about unprecedented power levels being detected. "That cannot be correct," said General Vextar as he stared at the tactical display showing energy outputs that seemed to violate known physical laws. No ship that size could generate those kinds of power readings. Fleet Marshal Zeal's mechanical brain ran diagnostic checks on all sensor systems while trying to calculate how the humans could be producing energy signatures that exceeded some of their largest dreadnoughts. "Sensor malfunction possible," it announced uncertainly. "These readings are inconsistent with observed vessel specifications." But the monitoring stations were functioning perfectly, and what they detected was the first public demonstration of humanity's greatest breakthrough in military technology. The Cascade fusion array did not simply use fusion power like other species. It weaponized the fusion process itself by creating a controlled chain reaction that converted matter directly into directed energy. Captain Lee Minho watched the countdown display as enemy weapons closed to impact range and felt the familiar calm that came over him during moments of critical decision. "Fire," he ordered in a voice that barely rose above conversational level. Weapons Officer Choi Yunji pressed the firing control, and the HSS Defiance unleashed humanity's answer to alien technological superiority. The beam that emerged from their main cannon was not the simple kinetic projectile that enemy sensors expected, but a focused stream of pure energy that had been compressed from the power output of stellar fusion into a weapon that could punch through any known defense. The effect was immediate and total. War Chieftain Gorth had just enough time to see an impossible light filling his forward viewport before the bloodrender simply ceased to exist. The massive warship did not explode or break apart. It was converted directly into component atoms that dispersed harmlessly into space. One moment there was a kilometer-long battlecruiser bristling with weapons and armor. The next, there was empty vacuum where it had been. The two escort destroyers, Skull Crusher and Bonebreaker, suffered the same fate as the human weapon beam continued past the flagship's former position. The energy stream was so tightly focused and so precisely aimed that it destroyed all three enemy vessels in a perfectly straight line before dissipating into the cosmic background radiation. Silence fell across Nexus Station as thousands of alien minds tried to process what they had just witnessed. The tactical displays showed 3 Brutok warships simply vanishing from existence, while the human vessel remained exactly where it had been throughout the engagement. There was no debris, no energy signature, no trace that the enemy fleet had ever existed except for the sensor records that proved it had happened. Sensor specialist Os Youngmin checked his instruments twice before making his report with professional calm. 3 enemy targets eliminated, he announced. No debris detected, no survivors detected. Weapon systems cycling down to standby configuration. Communications officer Han Ji-won was suddenly receiving dozens of urgent transmissions from alien fleets throughout the sector, as news of the engagement spread through hyperspace communication networks faster than light itself. Every major power in the galaxy wanted to know what kind of weapon humanity had just deployed, and whether it represented a threat to their own territories. Sir, we are receiving priority communication requests from the Hegemony Empire, the Synthetic Collective, the Etherian Republic, and at least 15 other major powers, she reported while trying to keep up with the flood of incoming messages. They all want immediate clarification of our weapons capabilities. Chief Engineer Kim Daeho's voice came through the ship's communication system with obvious satisfaction at how perfectly his systems had performed. Cascade fusion array shutdown complete, he announced. All safety protocols re-engaged. Containment. Field stable. Ready for second discharge if required. The bridge crew worked through their post-engagement checklist with the same calm efficiency they had shown throughout the battle, while around them the galaxy tried to comprehend what had just happened. Navigator Yoon Sujin confirmed their position and heading, while Weapons Officer Choi Yoonji secured her firing controls and began the process of recharging their revolutionary weapon system. Captain Lee Minho activated communications to address the monitoring stations and the thousands of alien observers who were waiting for some explanation of what they had witnessed. This is Captain Lee Minho of the HSS Defiance, he said in a clear voice that carried across interstellar space. The engagement is concluded. Human forces have achieved complete victory with no damage sustained. On Nexus Station, General Vexitar stared at his empty wineglass and tried to understand how everything he thought he knew about military technology had become obsolete in less than 30 seconds. Fleet Marshal Zeal's mechanical brain was running continuous calculations trying to determine how the humans had achieved energy output levels that exceeded theoretical maximums. Strategic analyst Quindar floated motionless in his tank as his water-based nervous system processed the implications of what he had observed. The humans had not simply won an engagement against superior odds. They had demonstrated a weapons technology that could potentially reshape the entire balance of power in galactic civilization. Counselor Thys of the Etherian Republic was the first to break the stunned silence. The silence that followed the destruction of War Chieftain Gorth's fleet stretched across Nexus Station like a physical thing that pressed down on every alien observer who had witnessed the impossible. Thousands of beings, from hundreds of different worlds, sat frozen in their seats while their minds struggled to process what their eyes had seen and their instruments had recorded. In 30 seconds, humanity had transformed from a minor curiosity into something that demanded immediate and careful attention. Ambassador Velkoth of the Hegemony Empire was the first to break from his shocked paralysis, and his forearms moved frantically as he activated his personal communication system to send urgent messages to his homeworld. The arrogant confidence that had marked his earlier dismissal of human capabilities was completely gone, replaced by the desperate need to warn his government that their military intelligence about Earth's technology was catastrophically wrong. Priority. Alpha communication to Supreme Command, he said in his own language while his purple skin had taken on a pale shade that indicated extreme stress. Human military capabilities far exceed all previous estimates. Recommend immediate diplomatic engagement and technology sharing negotiations. Repeat, immediate diplomatic engagement required. General Vexitar found himself in the unprecedented position of having to admit that his strategic assessments had been completely worthless. His military career had been built on the ability to accurately evaluate enemy capabilities, and the destruction of 3 Brutok warships by a single human vessel made him question everything he thought he knew about modern warfare. Contact the War Council, he ordered his aide through their encrypted communication channel. Tell them that we need to completely revise our threat assessments regarding human military technology. Also, begin immediate preparations for formal alliance negotiations. With Earth's government, Fleet Marshal Zeal's mechanical brain was processing probability calculations at maximum capacity, while trying to determine how human engineering had achieved what its databases insisted was theoretically impossible. The synthetic collective prided itself on logical analysis and mathematical precision, but the sensor data from the engagement contained results that did not fit any known scientific principles. Analysis indicates human weapons technology operates on principles unknown to current galactic science, it announced to its fellow collective representatives. Recommendation: acquire human technical data through diplomatic exchange or economic incentives. Alternative: develop defensive countermeasures through independent research programs. Throughout the observation areas, delegates from smaller powers and neutral species were having similar realizations about what the human demonstration meant for the existing balance of galactic politics. Species that had accepted secondary roles in galactic affairs because they lacked the military strength to challenge the major powers suddenly saw new possibilities opening before them. Counselor Thys of the Etherian Republic was already composing messages to Earth's government offering technology exchanges and mutual defense agreements. Her peaceful species had always preferred diplomacy to warfare, but they understood the value of having powerful friends when negotiations broke down. The humans have achieved something remarkable, she said to her diplomatic staff. They have proven that innovation can overcome raw power and that new ideas can defeat established methods. We should learn from their example and perhaps offer our own expertise in areas where we excel. The monitoring stations continued to broadcast their sensor data throughout the galaxy, and within hours every major civilization had access to detailed recordings of the engagement. Military analysts, weapons designers, and strategic planners across thousands of worlds worked frantically to understand how humanity had compressed stellar-level energy output into a weapon small enough to mount on a medium-sized warship. Admiral Kang Hyun and Lieutenant Commander Park Ji-soo returned to their transport ship to find that their communication systems were completely overwhelmed with incoming messages from alien governments, military organizations, and private companies, all wanting to establish contact with Earth's leadership. The few hundred messages they had expected to handle had grown to thousands, and more were arriving every minute. Sir, we have formal requests for diplomatic meetings from 43 different species, Park Ji-soo reported while trying to organize the flood of communications into some kind of manageable system. Trade proposals from commercial organizations across 12 star systems, and at least 6 offers of military alliance from powers that were laughing at us 3 hours ago. Admiral Kang Hyun smiled grimly as he read through some of the messages and noted how the tone had changed from condescending amusement to respectful interest and, in some cases, barely concealed desperation. Species that had dismissed humanity as irrelevant were now offering technology exchanges, economic partnerships, and mutual defense treaties. Send a standard response to all inquiries, he instructed. Inform them that Earth's government will consider all proposals through proper diplomatic channels and that we look forward to productive relationships with all peaceful species. But the most important changes were happening aboard the HSS Defiance, as Captain Lee Minho and his crew dealt with the reality that they had just become the most famous military unit in galactic history. Their names and faces were already being broadcast across interstellar news networks, and xenobiologists were requesting detailed studies of human physiology to understand how their species could develop such innovative military technology. Chief Engineer Kim Dae-ho was fielding communication requests from research institutions that wanted to understand the principles behind his Cascade fusion array. The alien scientists were offering enormous sums for technical specifications, and some were even requesting permission to visit Earth to study human engineering methods firsthand. Captain, I have at least 50 research organizations asking for interviews, he reported with amusement. They want to know how we achieved energy conversion ratios that their theories say should be impossible. I think our little demonstration has upset some very fundamental assumptions about physics. Weapons Officer Choi Yoon-ji, had become something of a celebrity among military tacticians who were analyzing her targeting precision and trying to understand how human gunners could achieve accuracy levels that exceeded their best computer-assisted systems. Several alien naval academies had already requested permission to send observers to study human weapons training methods. The aliens are discovering that human intuition and adaptability can sometimes outperform their mathematical calculations, she said with satisfaction. They're learning that there's more to warfare than just having the biggest guns and the strongest shields. Navigator Yoon Sujin's positioning calculations had been studied by strategic analysts throughout the galaxy, who marveled at how she had achieved perfect firing solutions against moving targets across interstellar distances. Her methods combined mathematical precision with intuitive understanding of space-time dynamics in ways that alien navigators found both impressive and incomprehensible. They keep asking me to explain my calculation methods, she reported. When I tell them that human navigation relies partly on intuition and experience rather than pure mathematics, they don't believe me. They think there must be some secret technology they don't understand. The ripple effects of the engagement spread far beyond the immediate participants as news of humanity's military capability reached every corner of galactic civilization. Trade routes that had avoided Earth's solar system because humans were considered unimportant suddenly became busy shipping lanes as commercial organizations rushed to establish business relationships with this newly revealed power. Pirate fleets that had preyed on human merchant vessels discovered overnight that attacking Earth ships was no longer considered a low-risk venture. Several criminal organizations sent messages to human authorities offering to negotiate territorial boundaries and protection agreements, clearly hoping to avoid the fate that had befallen War Chieftain Gorth's fleet. More importantly, the major military powers began reassessing their strategic positions throughout the galaxy, as they realized that human intervention could potentially tip the balance in any regional conflict. Alliances that had been stable for centuries suddenly seemed less certain when one of the participants might have access to weapons that could eliminate entire fleets with single shots. Captain Lee Minho addressed his crew one final time as they prepared to return to Earth with news of their success. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have accomplished something that will be remembered for generations," he said. "We have proven that human ingenuity and determination can overcome any obstacle, and that our species deserves respect from any civilization in the galaxy." The bridge crew listened as their captain continued with quiet pride. "More importantly, we have demonstrated that the measure of a military force is not its size or the intimidation factor of its weapons, but its effectiveness in achieving its objectives. Today, we showed the galaxy that humans fight by our own rules and that those rules can be very effective indeed." As the HSS Defiance began its journey home, messages continued to pour in from across the galaxy.